I'm Marcus Cole, and welcome to Feral Soul Stories. I want you to picture something for a moment. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, 40 miles from the nearest shore. A woman is alone in shark-infested water. Her research vessel is gone, sunk. The sea is still heaving from a storm that spent 3 hours tearing apart everything she built her expedition around. There is no land visible in any direction. There is no light except the occasional flicker of lightning still retreating to the south. Her name is Dr. Lisa Chen. She is 43 years old. She is a marine biologist who has devoted her career to understanding the creatures of the ocean, to speaking for them in the language of data and peer-reviewed papers and congressional testimony, because they cannot speak for themselves. She has spent 20 years trying to save the sea's animals. And tonight, the sea itself seems determined to take her. Then they appear. Not one, not two, 12 dolphins, materializing out of the dark water like something between a dream and a miracle, forming a deliberate circle around her body. They don't scatter when the waves hit. They don't abandon her when exhaustion makes her stop kicking and she starts to slip under, and leading them, pushing her northward through the dark with quiet, relentless purpose, hour after hour, is a single dolphin larger than the rest. She has a scar across her tail that Lisa would recognize anywhere. That Lisa has recognized in the dark, in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, 9 years after the last time she saw it. 9 years earlier, Lisa had spent 4 months keeping that dolphin alive. She had slept on a cot beside the treatment tank. She had hand-fed her through the worst of a fever that the veterinary team quietly prepared to lose. She had spent weeks in the water with her, guiding her body through a motion it no longer remembered how to make. She had broken the most important professional rule of her career, and she had named her. The question that kept Lisa swimming through that second night. The question that was more powerful than the cold and the exhaustion and the calculating part of her mind that kept trying to produce probability estimates was this. After 9 years, after a whole life lived in the open ocean, after becoming the matriarch of her own pod and ranging across hundreds of miles of sea, she had never been meant to leave. Why would that dolphin come back? How would she even know to come? This is the story of Echo. And this is the story of a debt that the ocean chose to repay. In January of 2015, Lisa Chen was 34 years old and had been working in marine biology for nearly a decade. She had grown up in Tampa, the daughter of a marine engineer father who took her to the water every weekend and a mother who taught high school biology and believed firmly that curiosity was the most important quality a person could cultivate. Lisa had gotten both of these things from them in full measure, the love of the water and the drive to understand it. And by the time she finished her doctoral work at the University of Miami, she had already published 3 papers and had the beginning of a reputation as someone who combined careful science with genuine passion for her subject. She had the kind of career that sounds glamorous from the outside, traveling the Florida Keys, studying wild dolphin pods, publishing research on bottlenose communication and social structure, occasionally appearing on documentary segments that showed her in the water with her study animals, sunlit and smiling. The reality was long days in the sun, longer nights writing grant proposals, the particular exhaustion of loving a world that most people only ever saw through aquarium glass or phone screens, and the constant low-level grief of watching the ocean change in ways that the data she collected made impossible to ignore. She was good at her work, methodical, careful with data, and careful with her heart, because the latter was a professional liability when you worked with animals. She had seen enough colleagues burn out after forming attachments that the work couldn't sustain. You cared about the species. You maintained professional distance from individuals. That was the rule, and Lisa believed in it. She had come to this rule honestly. In her second year of field work, she had spent 6 weeks monitoring a bottlenose dolphin mother and calf pair in the waters off Islamorada. She gave them temporary field designations, F12 and F12C. Not names, because names were the first step toward the kind of attachment that made the science personal and the losses unbearable. She watched them every morning from the research boat, documenting the calves' development, the mother's teaching behaviors, the intricate social choreography of the pod they moved through. When the calf was taken by a tiger shark on a Tuesday morning while Lisa was watching through binoculars from the research boat, she had written the event in her field notebook in the flat language of scientific record-keeping. Predation event, 8:47, estimated calf age 11 weeks, F12C, prey taken by Galiocerdo Cuvier, and then driven back to shore, walked into the facility bathroom, and sat on the tile floor for 20 minutes with her back against the wall, not crying, exactly, just sitting, with the particular weight of caring about something you have no power to protect. She never gave another field animal a name. She never let herself forget why. The morning she found Echo, she didn't know yet that the rule was about to be broken beyond any recovery. It was a Tuesday in late January when the call came in from a commercial fishing operation working about 20 miles south of Marathon Key. One of their nets had come up wrong, too heavy, moving wrong, thrashing in a way that fish didn't thrash. When the crew pulled it aboard, they found what was tangled inside. A bottlenose dolphin, roughly 7 years old by the look of her, approximately 400 pounds of muscle and intelligence and survival instinct, wrapped in gray skin that had gone pale with shock. The net had done damage that made the boat captain's voice go flat when he described it over the radio, as if keeping his tone controlled was the only way to manage what he was looking at. Her tail, the flukes, the horizontal fins that dolphins use to propel themselves through the water, the source of essentially all their speed and maneuverability, were nearly severed. Deep lacerations where the monofilament fishing line had cut through tissue and muscle, down to structures that weren't meant to be visible. Infection had already begun its quiet work in the warm Gulf water. The dolphin had been in the net, fighting, for over 3 hours before the crew realized what they had. By the time Lisa reached the vessel and got aboard, she could already see what she was dealing with from 10 feet away. She had seen net injuries before. She had never seen one this bad on an animal that was still alive. She remembered the first look. The dolphin was lying on her side on the deck, wrapped in wet towels that a crew member had thought to put there. And her eyes, dark, enormous, the color of deep water on a cloudy day, were open and tracking Lisa's movements as she approached. There was intelligence in those eyes that hit Lisa somewhere she hadn't expected to be hit. Not fear exactly. Not the blind panic of a trapped animal. Something more complex and harder to name. Assessment. A creature trying to understand what was happening to her, cataloging the new variables in her environment, and finding no framework in her entire evolved history that could explain any of it. Easy, Lisa said, kneeling beside her, though she knew the word meant nothing in any language the dolphin recognized. I'm going to help you. Just stay still. The dolphin made a sound, not the bright, rapid clicking of echolocation, that sophisticated biological sonar that dolphins use to navigate and hunt. Something lower, slower, produced deep in the throat, a vocalization that Lisa had heard before only in recordings of animals under conditions of extreme physiological stress. It was the sound of pain translated into the only language available to a creature that had no other way to say, "This is happening to me, and I cannot make it stop." "I know," Lisa said. "I know. We're going to fix it." She wasn't sure that was true, but she said it anyway. Lisa worked fast. The fishing crew helped where they could, holding towels, keeping water on the animal's skin, following Lisa's shouted instructions with the focused efficiency of men who spent their lives working with their hands. The technical work fell to Lisa, assessing the full extent of the injuries, administering the emergency analgesics, and stabilizing medications she kept in her field kit, making the calls that would have a veterinary team assembled and waiting when they reached the Keys Marine Laboratory facility in Marathon. The whole time, those dark eyes tracked her, watching everything she did, processing. "She's going to make it?" one of the crew asked, watching Lisa work. Lisa didn't answer right away. She was looking at the lacerations, measuring depth and damage against what she knew about dolphin anatomy and healing. She was doing math she didn't want to do in front of anyone. "We're going to try," she said finally. It took 40 minutes to reach Marathon. Those 40 minutes were some of the longest of Lisa's professional life. She sat beside the dolphin the entire way, one hand resting lightly on the animal's flank. Not doing anything useful, just maintaining contact, which she told herself was for the dolphin's physiological benefit, and which was also, honestly, for her own. "You're going to be okay," Lisa told her once, quietly enough that none of the crew could hear. She wasn't sure that was true either. It wasn't okay. Not at first. Not for a long time. The next 72 hours were the kind that age you in ways you don't fully notice until you look at photographs taken before and after. Lisa's team worked in rotating shifts around the treatment tank, monitoring the dolphin's vitals, managing the wound care protocols, adjusting medications as the infection asserted itself despite everything they threw at it. Lisa didn't rotate out. She told herself it was because no one else had her level of experience with cetacean trauma medicine. That was true. It wasn't the whole truth. The wounds were severe. 3 major lacerations across both flukes, the deepest one coming within a centimeter of severing the right fluke entirely. 2 of the 3 wounds were infected, the warm Gulf water and the hours in the net before rescue, combining to create a bacterial load that the dolphin's compromised immune system could barely fight. She ran a fever of 103.7 degrees for 4 days. Her appetite was non-existent. She spent most of that first week lying nearly still in the treatment tank, surfacing to breathe in a pattern that the team monitored obsessively, listening for the changes in rhythm that would signal a turn toward crisis. On the second night, the senior veterinarian on the team, a man named Dr. Robert Park, who had worked with marine mammals for 30 years and had learned to calibrate his optimism carefully, stood beside the tank with Lisa at midnight and said, very quietly, "If she makes it through tonight, I think she has a real chance." "She's going to make it through tonight," Lisa said. Dr. Park looked at her. "You don't know that." "No," Lisa agreed. "But she is." He was quiet for a moment. "You named her." It wasn't a question. Lisa had let it slip earlier in the day, in passing, and the word had gone into the room and stayed there. "Echo," Lisa said. She waited for the professional correction, the gentle reminder about attachment and objectivity and the importance of maintaining distance. Dr. Park just nodded slowly. "Echo," he repeated. Then he went to check on the overnight monitors, and Lisa stayed where she was. She had named her on the 3rd night, sitting alone beside the tank at 3 in the morning, watching the dolphins breathing in the blue-green glow of the facility lights. She hadn't planned to name her. She had been aware, in some active part of her mind, that naming was exactly what she wasn't supposed to do. But at some point in those sleepless hours, watching this animal fight with everything she had for a life and a body that was failing her, the dolphin had become Echo. Partly because of the tank's acoustics, every sound bounced and multiplied in the tiled space, the facility full of reflected noise in a way that felt alive, responsive, like the water itself was listening. And partly because there was something about this animal in those specific hours of extremity that felt like an answer to what question Lisa couldn't have said. The fever broke on day 5. Lisa was asleep on the cot. She'd moved to the room adjacent to the treatment tank, still in the building, still within hearing distance of the monitoring equipment, when the alert tone changed from the steady rhythm of careful watch to the different pattern that meant something had shifted. She was beside the tank in 30 seconds, and what she found was a dolphin whose temperature had dropped to 100.2, whose breathing had deepened and regularized, and whose eyes, when they found Lisa's face across the tank, held something that had been absent for days. Alertness. Presence. The assessment gaze back again. "There you are," Lisa said. The feeding breakthrough came that same day. Echo hadn't been eating. The combination of pain and fever and the alien environment of the tank had left her in a state of withdrawal so complete that the team had been discussing tube feeding as the next step. Lisa tried the hand-feeding approach first, kneeling at the tank's edge, holding a small mackerel just at the waterline and waiting. She waited for 40 minutes. The fish grew warm in her hand. Her knees ached against the concrete floor. She didn't move, and she didn't speak, because she had learned over years of working with wild animals that the most important thing you could offer in those moments was stillness. Proof that you had no agenda except to be there. Then Echo moved, slowly, carefully, in a way that was clearly painful, She drifted toward the edge of the tank, each movement deliberate and economical in the way that creatures move when movement costs something. Her rostrum broke the surface. She regarded the fish. She regarded Lisa. She took the fish with a delicacy that seemed incongruous with the size and power of her, as if she understood that the transaction required care from her side as well as from Lisa's. She ate it. "Good girl," Lisa whispered. "Good girl." She fed her 6 more mackerel before Echo showed signs of being done. Then she sat back on her heels and laughed, quietly, to herself, the release of something that had been held very tightly for 5 days. The infection finally surrendered to the treatment protocol by the end of the 2nd week. Antibiotics in the food, wound care twice daily, water quality managed with the obsessive precision that the situation demanded. Echo began tolerating the wound dressing procedures with a patience that surprised everyone on the team. Not the resigned tolerance of an animal that had given up on controlling its situation, but something more active. She would position herself at the edge of the tank when Lisa arrived for morning treatment. She would go still when Lisa's hands moved toward her tail. She would hold herself steady through the cleaning and redressing process with a quality of cooperation that felt, unmistakably, like a choice. "She trusts you," one of Lisa's junior colleagues observed one afternoon, watching Echo hold position while Lisa worked on the deepest laceration. The young woman had been working with the team for 2 months and still found the whole situation remarkable to watch. "I've never seen a wild dolphin do that. Not this fast. She's intelligent," Lisa said, not looking up from the wound. She figured out that the treatment is working. She can feel that it's working. Her colleague was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I meant," she said. Lisa didn't answer. She knew what the young woman meant. She had known for at least a week, if she was honest with herself. She kept working. The swimming rehabilitation began in the 4th week, and it was simultaneously the most technically demanding and the most unexpectedly moving work Lisa had ever done. Echo's tail had sustained damage that would be permanent. The right fluke would never move with full efficiency again. The normal propulsive mechanism of a bottlenose dolphin, that powerful vertical tail stroke that generates the force to push 400 pounds of animal to speeds of 20 miles per hour in short bursts, was no longer available to Echo in its original form. The scarring had altered the structural integrity of the right fluke in ways that couldn't be reversed by any amount of healing. She would need to compensate. She would need to develop a modified movement pattern that redistributed the propulsive load, using the left fluke and the muscular core of her body in new proportions to achieve forward motion. She would need, in other words, to learn to swim again. And she would need help doing it. Lisa had worked with animals in rehabilitation many times. She had helped sea turtles learn to navigate with missing flippers, had assisted birds with damaged wings learn modified flight patterns, had worked with manatees recovering from boat strike injuries. Nothing had prepared her for this. Partly because of the scale of the animal, working in the water with 400 pounds of dolphin required a different kind of physical engagement than any previous rehabilitation work. And partly because of something harder to articulate, the quality of Echo's participation. She wasn't a passive subject. She was a student. Lisa spent 18-hour days in the water and beside it. She developed a rating system for Echo's movement attempts. 0 through 5 on a laminated card she wore clipped to the strap of her wetsuit, and filled pages of notebooks with observations and adjustments. She would guide Echo's body through a movement sequence with her hands, physically repositioning the animal's posture, demonstrating the desired motion the way you'd guide a person's arm to show them a physical therapy exercise. Echo would attempt the movement, feel it succeed or fail. Pause. Try again. On day 9 of the formal swimming rehabilitation work, Echo produced what Lisa's rating system classified as a 3, a movement that was genuinely functional, genuinely efficient, a modified stroke that worked. Lisa pumped her fist in the air, alone at poolside at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and then laughed at herself, and then sat down on the cold concrete and laughed harder because somewhere in the past 4 weeks the professional distance she had maintained so carefully for so long had quietly and completely dissolved, and she hadn't even noticed it happening until this moment. Celebrating alone in an empty facility because a dolphin had gotten her stroke sequence right. She wrote in her notebook that night, *E, produced functional modified stroke pattern, third session, attempt 9, estimated efficiency 60% of normal. Progress exceeds projections. Then, below that, in different handwriting, as if a different person had written it. She knew she got it right. She knew, by the end of March, 11 weeks after her rescue, Echo was swimming. Not with the effortless speed and power of a healthy bottlenose, not the way she had moved before the nets found her, but with a fluid, sustainable competence that made the entire veterinary team gather at the tank on the morning Lisa first let her do full laps without guidance. She moved through the water with her modified stroke, the scar on her right fluke catching the light with each cycle. And there was something in her movement that was neither the original thing nor a diminished version of it. It was a new thing, something she had invented from necessity and will and the particular stubbornness that had kept her alive through the worst of the first weeks. Lisa watched her make 5 laps, then 10. Then she stopped counting. Pride, the kind that has nothing to do with yourself and everything to do with who you were lucky enough to witness. The release date was set for mid-April. The protocol was what it always was: transport to open water, remove the transport stretcher, monitor initial behavior, observe the return to wildlife. Professional, standardized, repeatable. Lisa had participated in marine mammal releases before. She knew the procedure. She told herself she was fine. She spent the week before the release doing what she cataloged in her notes as final health monitoring assessments and what was actually something closer to memorization. The exact pitch and rhythm of the sound Echo made when she wanted fish. The way she angled her body slightly to the left when something in the water caught her attention. The particular pattern of the scarring, 3 long lacerations across the flukes, a scatter of smaller marks from the net webbing higher on the tailstock, as distinctive as a fingerprint, as specific as a face. The night before the release, Lisa stayed at the facility later than she needed to. She sat beside the treatment tank in the blue-green light and watched Echo make slow, unhurried circuits of the water. She thought about rules and the reasons for them. She thought about the specific week, 11 years before, when she had written if 12C, prey taken Galio Cerdo Cuvier in a field notebook and then sat on a bathroom floor. She had built a wall from that experience, and the wall had protected her, and for many years she had believed the protection was worth the cost. Now she was not sure she had understood the cost correctly. The cost hadn't been what she thought. The cost was this: sitting beside this tank tomorrow and watching those dark eyes go back to the water and away from her, possibly forever. She had broken the rule. She had let herself care. And what she had gotten from breaking it was 4 months of the most important work of her career and a dolphin who could swim, in this particular night. She thought that was probably worth it. She thought about the circles she would watch tomorrow from a boat in the April Gulf and try to decide what she would make of them. If stories like this reach something in you, stories about the bonds that form between humans and the wild creatures of this world, about what happens when we let ourselves care about something beyond the boundary of our own species, then I want you to consider subscribing to Feral Soul Stories by Marcus Cole. Every week, I bring you another story like this one. Another bond that shouldn't have been possible. Another reminder that love is larger than we've been told. Join us. Hit the subscribe button. Be part of a community that believes these connections matter. The morning of the release was one of those April days in the Keys that feels like the weather's apology for everything winter did. Clear and warm, a light wind off the Gulf, the water a shade of blue-green that didn't look entirely real against the white of the boat's hull. They loaded Echo into the transport stretcher with practiced efficiency and headed out into the Gulf, for miles offshore to water deep enough and open enough that she'd have room. Lisa stood at the boat's edge when they lowered Echo into the open water. The stretcher released. There was a long second of full, suspended breath from everyone aboard, when Echo simply floated as if she was absorbing the information that the boundaries were gone, that the walls that had defined her world for 4 months were absent. that the water went in every direction now, forever. Then she dove. A clean, deep dive, her body sliding under the surface with the efficiency of the modified stroke she'd spent weeks building. She disappeared into the blue-green water as if she'd never been anywhere else. The team watched the surface. 2 minutes. 5. 10. People began talking quietly. Good release, good behavior, exactly what you want to see. Lisa stayed at the rail. She told herself this was the best possible outcome. She told herself this was the point. She had done her job and the dolphin had gone home, and this was exactly right. Then Echo surfaced 20 feet from the boat. She stayed there for a moment, looking at the vessel with those dark eyes. Then she began to circle, slowly, deliberately, not the random movement of an animal orienting after release, a deliberate circuit of the boat's perimeter, once, twice, 3 complete circles. On the second pass, she came closest to Lisa's side of the boat, and for a moment those eyes were visible just above the waterline, looking directly up, not at the boat, at Lisa. Then she was gone. A full surface breach, her entire body clearing the water for one suspended second, the scarred tail catching the April sunlight before she came down and dove, and the gulf closed over her, and she was the oceans again. Lisa stood at the rail for a long time. Her colleague put a hand on her shoulder. Nobody said anything. There wasn't anything that needed to be said. The years that followed were full in all the ways that a career can be full. Lisa published widely. Studies on dolphin social structure and acoustic communication, papers on the impacts of commercial fishing on cetacean populations in the Gulf of Mexico, a widely cited piece on behavioral indicators of stress in marine mammal populations that became required reading in several graduate programs. She was invited onto conservation advisory boards, testified twice before congressional committees about marine mammal protection policy, mentored graduate students who went on to their own significant work. She moved from Marathon to a research facility in Key West in 2017, and in 2019 accepted a senior research position that had her splitting her time between the Florida facility and a dedicated coral reef monitoring program that operated from a research vessel called the Meridian. The Meridian work was intensive and important. Coral reefs are among the most complex and most threatened ecosystems on Earth. Their intricate architecture, supporting something like a quarter of all marine species, and the data that Lisa's team was collecting was contributing to a growing understanding of reef degradation that would eventually inform conservation policy across the Gulf and beyond. She loved the work with the focused, unsentimental devotion that had characterized her career from the beginning. She continued to work with injured marine mammals when cases came through the facility. A young manatee with propeller wounds in 2017. A juvenile bottlenose with a severe fishing line entanglement in 2020. A small pod of spinner dolphins that had stranded on a Key West beach during an unusual weather event in 2022, 3 of whom survived to be released. In each case, she was thorough, expert, and appropriately detached. She did not name any of them. She did not sit on cots beside treatment tanks at 3 in the morning. She did not break the rule. She wasn't sure anymore whether she was maintaining the rule because she believed in it or because she was afraid of what it would cost her to break it again. Both things could be true simultaneously. She understood that and left it unexamined. She didn't forget Echo. She wasn't sure forgetting was possible or that she had any particular desire for it. But she filed a memory in the way you file things that are complete, whole, closed, a particular chapter of a particular time that you're glad existed and do not need to revisit in order to carry it with you. She thought about Echo occasionally, especially when she was on the water, especially in those moments when a dolphin would surface near the research boat and stay there, watching in a way that felt different from the random curiosity of a wild animal encountering a vessel. She would look at those dark, intelligent eyes above the waterline and think, briefly, of other dark eyes, and then she would go back to her work. She thought about Echo the way you think about the people and the moments that change the shape of who you are. With gratitude, with a kind of permanent, quiet affection that didn't require its object to be present. 9 years passed. In the autumn of 2024, Lisa was 43 years old, leading a research team of 6 aboard the Meridian 200 miles off the Florida coast in the Gulf of Mexico. They were 18 days into a 6-week coral reef monitoring expedition. The team had settled into the comfortable rhythms of extended field work. Morning dives, afternoon data processing, the evening meals that were loud with the particular camaraderie of people working hard together far from home. Lisa's team included 2 graduate students, a research associate she'd worked with for 5 years, a dive safety officer, and Captain Dave Rodriguez, who had 20 years of Gulf experience and an easy, competent authority that made everyone aboard feel safe. They had collected some of the best reef data of the expedition in the 2 days before the storm. Lisa had been genuinely excited, staying up late to review measurements with her graduate students, finding patterns in the data that suggested a direction for their next published work. She had gone to sleep that night feeling the particular satisfaction of research going well. The storm came without much warning, the way Gulf storms sometimes do in autumn, when warm water and cold fronts interact in ways that modeling doesn't always predict correctly. The weather forecast had shown a system building to the southwest, but the modeling had placed it 40 miles north of their position and weakening as it moved. By the time the updated models reached them, the meridian was already inside it. 15-foot swells, horizontal rain, wind that made communication on deck impossible and made standing upright on the meridian's rolling deck a matter of constant active effort. The meridian was a sound vessel, well-maintained, with a stable hull design meant for exactly these conditions. Captain Rodriguez was running through his storm protocols with calm, practiced efficiency. None of that mattered when the lightning hit. It was 7:14 in the evening. Lisa was in the main research cabin reviewing data on her laptop when the bolt came. She remembered the time because she had been looking at the timestamp on a file, the specific, ordinary detail that the brain clutches in moments of sudden extremity because it needs something concrete to hold on to. The strike hit the meridian's mast, traveled the electrical system with the speed and totality that electricity has when it finds a path, and found something in the engine compartment that it turned into a fire in less time than it takes to describe. The fire suppression system activated. It bought them time, maybe 4 minutes of contained fire before the suppression was overwhelmed. The life raft deployment was textbook, Rodriguez coordinating with a research associate and dive safety officer. The raft deployed off the starboard side, everyone moving with the sharp focus that training produces when the emergency it prepared you for actually arrives. Lisa came up from below with her personal flotation device already on, moving toward the stern, shouting to confirm head count. 6 people on the boat. The raft held 6. The math was simple. What wasn't simple was the wave action. The meridian was listing now, a 30-degree roll that was getting worse as the fire spread to systems that affected stability. The raft had deployed correctly, and the first 3 team members were in it, but the gap between the meridian's stern and the raft was widening in the swell, and then a wave hit the raft from the wrong angle, and it was 8 feet away, then 12. Then Lisa was at the stern rail, and someone was shouting her name from the raft, and the gap was 15 feet and still growing. She jumped. She hit the water 8 feet short of the raft. The Gulf of Mexico in October, in the dark, in the remnants of a storm, closed over her, and she came up kicking, fighting the PFD to the surface, coughing out the water she'd inhaled on impact. The raft was 20 feet away now. 30. The wave action was against her. She swam for it anyway. She swam until she couldn't close the distance anymore, until it became clear that the storm and the current were doing something she couldn't overcome with any amount of effort. The raft was still visible. She could see the emergency light on it, bobbing in the swells. She screamed. The wind took her voice and scattered it into nothing. She watched the meridian burn. She hadn't planned to watch it, but there was nothing else to look at, and she needed something to track. It listed further as the fire spread, its profile changing against the black sky, the orange light of the fire reflected in the faces of the waves around her. It took 11 minutes to sink. She counted the minutes because counting gave her mind something to do that wasn't calculating the probability of what happened to a person alone in these conditions. For the first hour, she swam north because north was the direction of shore and swimming felt better than floating. She was in good physical condition. Years of diving kept her that way. but the difference between being in good shape and what she was now attempting to do was significant and growing more significant by the minute. The swells were still 8 to 10 feet, and navigating them required constant expenditure of energy just to maintain orientation. She could see nothing useful from the troughs, and only more water from the crests. The raft's emergency beacon was either not within visual range, or the rain was thick enough to swallow it. After 40 minutes of swimming, she stopped trying to find it, and started simply swimming north, because north was a direction, and direction was something to hold on to when everything else was gone. She began rationing her effort. Tread water through the worst of the waves. Swim only when the surface flattened enough that forward progress was possible. Rest in a life vest on the downslope of each swell where the wave energy was lowest. Conserve everything she had. The calculating part of her mind was trying to be useful, which was not what she needed from it. It was producing information she hadn't requested. Water temperature, 74 degrees. Hypothermia onset delayed, but not prevented. Distance to shore, approximately 40 miles, impossible to swim. Time until dawn, approximately 9 hours. Probability of being located before dawn, dependent on factors she didn't have enough information to estimate. She pushed this part of her mind toward the back and tried to put other things in front of it. Things she loved. The specific, solid things that were worth staying alive to return to. She thought about Echo. She wasn't sure exactly when it started, but at some point in that first hour the thought arrived and didn't leave. Maybe because the water was where Echo lived, and the water was all there was in any direction. Maybe because her mind was reaching automatically for something it loved, because loving something was easier to sustain than calculating survival odds in the dark. She thought about Echo's modified stroke, the particular elegance of a solution built from necessity and patience, and the kind of stubbornness that refuses to accept that the body you have is the only body possible. She thought about 40 minutes on a concrete floor with a warm fish growing warmer in her hand. She thought about 3 circles in April sunlight and what they might have meant and what it had cost her not to let herself believe it at the time. She thought, I hope she's out there. I hope she's well. I hope her pod is large and her range is wide and the Gulf has been good to her. She'd been in the water for 90 minutes when she felt the movement beneath her. Not the water's movement. She'd been feeling that constantly, could read the water's motion the way you learn to read anything you've spent enough time with. This was different. Something beneath the surface, large, purposeful, displacing water in the way that large living things do when they're moving with intention toward a specific destination. Her body went rigid with a fear response that was total and instantaneous. Every muscle locking up, her breath stopping, her mind producing the word shark with a clarity that left no room for anything else. Then the dolphins surfaced, 6 feet away, then another, and another. They came in a ring. In the next 30 seconds, they appeared one by one around the perimeter of the space she occupied, forming a circle that was loose at first and then tightened as the last members of the pod arrived and took their positions. She counted them later, when she was capable of counting, when her hands had stopped shaking and she had light and enough distance from the night to organize what had happened into a sequence she could examine. 12. A complete pod, distributed around her in a pattern that was deliberate and unmistakable and had no precedent in anything Lisa had studied or read about dolphin behavior in 34 years of caring deeply about the subject. They weren't panicking. They weren't displaying anything that looked like feeding or threat behavior. They were simply there, present in the water around her, organized. One of them pushed against her from behind. Not a collision, a contact. The rostrum finding the small of her back with a pressure that was firm without being rough, precise, directed, pushing her body forward, north. When the exhaustion and the confusion of the moment made her stop swimming and start to drift, the pressure came again. Gentle, definite. Okay, she said to the dark water, to the dolphin behind her that she couldn't see. Her voice came out strange, raw and thin, barely more than a whisper. Okay, north. What followed was 6 hours that Lisa would spend the next several years trying to describe adequately, in journal articles, and in lectures and in quiet conversations with people who asked what it had been like and would never fully manage. The pod maintained their formation as she swam. When waves knocked her sideways, the circle tightened around her, bodies on either side to steady her back to course. When exhaustion made her stop and she began to slip below the surface, she felt them, one on each side, sometimes two, pressing against her, their bodies warm and solid in the cold, dark water, supporting her weight, keeping her face above the surface until she could find her breathing again. The warmth was something she hadn't expected. She had known, in the factual way that a marine biologist knows the facts of her subject, that dolphins are mammals with a core body temperature close to a human's. Knowing this and feeling it were different things. In cold water, in the dark, with everything that mattered in the balance, the warmth of another living creature pressed against your side is specific and profound in a way that no description fully captures. It was the physical fact of not being alone made tactile, undeniable. It kept her moving when moving seemed impossible. They took turns. She began to notice this around the third hour, when she had enough remaining coherence to notice patterns rather than simply respond to them. The dolphin maintaining the northward pressure at her back would shift away, and another would take the position. The one supporting her sides rotated with a regularity that seemed purposeful, deliberate, as if they had a system, as if they had discussed it, which was not how dolphin cognition worked, and yet the behavior she was watching had no other name. They were coordinated. They were sustained. They did not tire and leave. They took turns so that none of them would tire enough to leave. She had been in the water for perhaps 4 hours when she noticed the largest dolphin, the one who had initiated the northward push, the one who returned most consistently to the position directly behind her, resuming contact when the rotation brought her back, pressing her forward when she flagged. She noticed first by feel, there was a quality to the physical presence of this dolphin that was different from the others, a density and sureness of contact that suggested an older animal, one with authority in the pod. Then, in the moments when the dolphin surfaced close enough and the conditions were calm enough, she noticed the fluke. Moonlight on water gives you shapes more than details. But shapes can be enough when you've memorized something. When you've changed the dressings on it 100 times, when you've traced its outline with your fingertips in the blue-green light of a treatment facility at 3 in the morning. 3 long marks, silver against gray. A scatter of smaller marks higher on the tail stalk, the pattern of them as specific and unrepeatable as any fingerprint. Echo, she said. She said it before she had fully decided to say it. The name came out of somewhere below conscious thought, pulled up by the recognition before the recognition had finished resolving. The dolphin surfaced directly beside her. Those dark eyes, enormous, the color of deep water, were 6 inches from her face, looking at her with the same quality of attention that had stopped Lisa cold on a boat deck 9 years ago. The same assessment, the same intelligence, the same something that didn't have a scientific name and never had. For one long second, they looked at each other in the dark Gulf of Mexico, 40 miles from shore, 43 years and 34 years old respectively, 9 years and 85 miles, and a whole life lived in the open ocean between them. Then Echo pressed against Lisa's back, and Lisa turned north and swam. She sang after a while. She couldn't have said exactly when it started. Somewhere in the 5th hour, when her reserves were getting thin enough that her mind was looking for ways to stay present, to stay conscious, to keep the part of her that was capable of continuing to swim engaged and active. Her mind had started doing the thing that minds do in extremity, producing probability estimates she didn't want and survival timelines she didn't need. Singing was better than that. Singing required the part of the brain that produces words and sequences and rhythm, and keeping that part busy left less room for the calculating part. Songs from childhood that she hadn't thought about in years. A song her mother used to sing while doing dishes in their Tampa kitchen. A folk song that Lisa had never known the origin of, but had memorized completely by the time she was 5. A ridiculous song from an animated film she'd watched 30 times in the year she was 7. The lyrics came back with the clarity that exhausted, desperate memory sometimes achieves. Every word exact, every note in place. and she sang them to the dark water and the 12 dolphins who swam with her. It was not, in that water, in that dark, a ridiculous thing to do. Nothing was ridiculous in that water. Everything was only real. The dolphins didn't leave when she sang. If anything, the circle seemed to tighten slightly, the animals moving closer in a way that she noticed and couldn't explain and decided not to try to explain. She was past the point where explaining things felt necessary or even possible. She was in the part of the night where you simply do the next thing. Sing the next line, make the next stroke, keep your face above the water for the next minute. Around 4 in the morning, her right leg cramped. Not a minor cramp. The kind that hits like a closed fist that locks the muscles solid and turns your leg into a useless weight. That takes away 10 seconds of controlled movement in a situation where 10 uncontrolled seconds is a significant problem. She cried out, a short, involuntary sound, and went under. She came up coughing, her orientation scrambled, the direction she'd been swimming lost in the disorientation of the cramp and the wave action and the water she'd inhaled on the way down. Echo was under her before she'd finished coughing. Literally under her, the dolphin's body positioned beneath Lisa's, the broad, warm back of her lifting, not pulling Lisa out of the water, but providing a surface, something solid to push against, something to keep her face above the surface while the cramp ran its course and her breathing found itself again. The other dolphins had closed the circle tighter. For 2 or 3 minutes, she couldn't have said exactly. Lisa lay across Echo's back in the dark Gulf of Mexico while the cramped muscle in her leg unclenched itself, while she coughed the last of the water out while she breathed. Okay, she said finally, to the dolphin beneath her, to the dark water, to whoever might be listening in a universe that had produced this particular night. Okay, I'm okay. Echo surfaced beside her. Those eyes again. That look. Then the pressure at Lisa's back, and she turned north, and she swam. She would write about this moment 2 years later, in a paper that was simultaneously the most rigorous scientific document she'd ever produced and the most difficult thing she'd ever tried to put into words. She was reading through the final draft on a Tuesday morning when she reached that section, stopped, set the paper down, and cried for 20 minutes before going back to it. The reviewers, she noted afterward, had not asked her to change anything. Dawn came slowly and completely, the way Gulf dawns do. The sky lightening in distinct stages from black to a deep blue to a gray that held the first warmth, and then finally to the pale gold of early morning that meant the storm had finished its work and moved on. The swells were still significant, 4 to 6 feet, but the violence had gone out of them. The wind had dropped to something manageable, and for the first time since the meridian went down, Lisa could see the horizon in every direction. Empty water in most directions. But she was alive, and in the growing light, she could look at that fact with something approaching clarity. The fishing vessel appeared at the edge of her visibility as a shape first, then as a light, then as the specific profile of a 60-foot commercial fishing boat running at low speed toward the northwest. The Santa Elena, out of Cortez, Florida. She learned the name later, along with the name of the captain, Bill Reeves, and the first mate, a young man named Tommy Garcia, who had been watching the GPS fish finder when the dolphin concentration appeared on the screen in a pattern that neither of them had seen before. Wild pods don't hold like that, Garcia had said to Reeves, indicating the stationary cluster on the screen. They're not moving. Something's wrong with them. Or they found something, Reeves had replied, an altered course. Lisa could see the boat before its crew could see her, because the dolphins had been consistently positioning her at the crests of swells through the dawn hours, pushing her up when the waves rose, guiding her to the high points where she had the most visibility. She screamed until her voice was a thread. She waved the reflective strip on her PFD until her arms were shaking. The Santa Elena altered course toward her, and the minutes that followed were the kind that seemed to exist outside of normal time. The approach, the thrown rope, the hands that pulled her over the gunwale and onto the deck, the ruffled blanket that appeared around her shoulders from somewhere, the voices asking if she was injured, if there were others, what had happened. She was on deck for perhaps 40 seconds before she turned back to the water. The dolphins were still there, 12 of them, in their circle, just off the Santa Elena's stern, maintaining their formation with the same steadiness they'd maintained it through the night. Reeves and Garcia were standing at the rail looking at them with expressions that Lisa recognized from years of showing people things they didn't have categories for. "They're not leaving," Garcia said. "No," Lisa agreed. The pod held position for several minutes as the Santa Elena sat with her. Then, one by one, they began to sound. Not the scattered panic diving of animals being disturbed, but the unhurried departure of creatures whose work is done. The circle dissolved from the edges inward, each dolphin diving in its own time, the gap they left closing behind them in the water as if they'd never been there. Echo was the last. She surfaced once more, close to the Santa Elena's hull, close enough that the morning light caught every detail of her clearly. Her dark eye above the waterline, the modified swimming posture that Lisa had helped her develop in a treatment tank a decade ago, the slightly different weight distribution that Echo had turned into something efficient and entirely her own. The 3 long scars across the right fluke, silver in the morning light, as clear as the day they'd healed. She looked at Lisa for a long moment. Then she dove, and the Gulf of Mexico closed over the place she'd been, and held its surface up to the early sun as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The formal identification took 6 weeks. Lisa's colleagues at the Keys Marine Laboratory ran the photographs from the Santa Elena. Captain Reeves had thought to photograph the dolphins before they departed, and the images were sharp enough for the comparison work, against 9 years of cetacean ID records for the Gulf. Scar patterning matched. Fluke shape and dimensions matched. The characteristic modified propulsive stroke visible in the photographs matched against rehabilitation records dating to April 2015. The dolphin who had led the pod, who had maintained contact with Lisa most consistently throughout the rescue, who had positioned herself beneath Lisa's body at the moment of the leg cramp, was Echo, documented matriarch of a pod of 12 who ranged across roughly 300 square miles of the northern Gulf of Mexico. Her home territory at the time of the rescue was approximately 85 miles from where the Meridian had sunk. She and her pod arrived, by the best estimates available from the timeline, within approximately 1 hour of the vessel going down. Dr. Park, the senior veterinarian who had stood beside Lisa at midnight in 2015 and quietly told her he wasn't sure Echo would make it through the night, was now the director of the facility, and he called Lisa the morning the identification was confirmed. He had been one of the people she'd called from the Santa Elena, still wrapped in a wool blanket and shaking, trying to describe what had happened in terms that made sense. "It's confirmed," he said, when she picked up the phone. She already knew from the particular quality of his voice. "Echo," she said. "Echo." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I have never seen anything like this in my life." "No," Lisa agreed. "The paper we write about this. We'll write it carefully," she said. "We'll present the identification data, the behavioral observations, the timeline. We'll be thorough and rigorous, and we will not overstate anything." "And it still won't be enough," he said, "to explain it." "No," she said, "it won't." He was right. The papers that came, and there were eventually several, peer-reviewed, methodologically careful, published in journals that take their responsibility to rigor seriously, captured everything that could be documented and confirmed. The identification, the behavioral record, the timeline, the 85-mile distance, the 1-hour arrival, all of it verified, all of it standing up to scrutiny, all of it representing something that the field of cetacean cognition would need to account for. None of the papers explained it. What brought Echo to that specific location, 85 miles from her home range, in a storm, within roughly an hour of the Meridian going down, is not something that existing scientific frameworks explain adequately. Lisa knows the theories. She has contributed to several of them, in papers written since the rescue that approach the question through what is known about dolphin acoustic perception and long-range echolocation, about the way low-frequency sound travels through water in ways that have no equivalent in air, about the extraordinary sensory sensitivity of species that evolved to navigate by sound in an environment that transmits it very differently than the medium humans are built for. She knows that dolphins can detect acoustic events from extraordinary distances. She knows that a sinking vessel in storm conditions produces sounds with distinctive characteristics. She knows that it is not impossible, in principle, that these sounds could carry information that a dolphin's evolved sensory systems could parse in ways no current model fully describes. She doesn't spend much time on the theories. What Lisa thinks about, what she told me when I met with her at her facility in Key West on a late afternoon in the spring of last year, sitting on the dock with the Gulf going gold around us, is a Tuesday night in 2015 and a pair of dark eyes across a treatment tank. In the specific moment when she broke the most important professional rule of her career and named the animal that would spend the next 4 months teaching her things she hadn't known she didn't know. She thinks about a laminated card with a rating system scrawled in waterproof marker. She thinks about 40 minutes kneeling on a concrete floor with a warm fish in her hand. She thinks about 3 circles around a boat in the April sunlight, and what it takes to believe that a gesture means what it looks like it means. She came back, Lisa said. She was looking out at the Gulf, at the blue-green water that went on forever in both directions. 9 years and 85 miles, and she came back. She was quiet for a long time after that. A pelican landed on the dock at the far end and regarded us with its ancient, unreflective eye. A research boat moved past in the middle distance, its engines a low hum. "Do you know what I think about most?" she said finally. "I think about the circles. Before I ever let her go, 3 circles around the boat, and then she was gone, and I didn't know what to make of it. I told myself it was behavior I was reading into. I told myself I was projecting." She paused, and then I'm in the water 9 years later, and they're circling again. And this time I knew exactly what it meant, because she taught me what it meant. She taught me back in 2015, and I just needed enough time to understand the lesson. I've been telling stories about animals for 25 years. I've traveled to every continent and sat with people who work in the closest quarters with the wildest creatures on Earth, and every one of them eventually arrives at the same place. The place where the data runs out and something else begins. The place where every framework you have runs up against a specific, undeniable experience that it cannot contain. Some of them resist it because they are scientists, and resistance to the inexplicable is part of the discipline. Some of them welcome it because they became scientists because they were first moved by wonder, and wonder requires a space the inexplicable can occupy. Most of them do both in different proportions in different moments. Lisa does both. It is, she would tell you, exactly the right response. Here is what I believe. After all of it, we're not the only ones who form attachments that persist across time and distance. We're not the only ones who remember the specific weight and quality of a particular relationship, the specific feel of a particular pair of hands, the specific sound of a particular voice. We are not the only ones who choose, in moments of extremity, to navigate by the map of who we love rather than the map of what makes practical sense. We share these capacities with the creatures we have spent centuries insisting we are fundamentally separate from, fundamentally different from, in ways that made their lives matter less than ours. And every time the data catches up to the experience, every time the photographs are run against the records and the identification is confirmed and the impossible thing is verified as having actually happened, we move, however slowly and however reluctantly, toward a more truthful account of what kind of world we're actually in. It's a world where a dolphin remembers, where 9 years is not too long, and 85 miles is not too far, and a storm-dark sea in the middle of the night is not a distance that a debt cannot cross. It's a world where the bonds we form, even the ones we didn't plan to form, even the ones we built walls against, are real in ways that outlast the moments that created them. It's a world where the bonds we form with wild creatures, the moments of genuine connection that we sometimes allow ourselves and sometimes deny ourselves and always remember, those bonds are real in ways that outlast the moments that created them. They live in the animal as surely as they live in us. They travel across distances we cannot measure with instruments we haven't built yet. It's a world with more room for love than we've been told, than we've allowed ourselves to believe. Tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced something with an animal you couldn't explain? Something that made you question the distance you'd assumed existed between their inner life and yours? I read every comment. I want to know what you've witnessed. And before you go, if this story moved something in you, if you want to stay in this world of impossible bonds and untamed hearts, I have 2 more stories waiting for you right now. Click on either one. Each of them will take you somewhere you didn't expect to go and bring you back changed.